Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Folkestone and Hythe Parish Council's Joint Committee. Please note this meeting is being streamed live to the internet. Please could all members ensure their microphone is set to mute unless they are speaking to reduce any background noise. So with that being said, we'll move on to the first item for appointments of chair. So as members are aware, the chair alternates between the district councillor and a parish/town councillor. For the purposes of this meeting, the committee must appoint a parish/town councillor. So do we have any proposals?
I'd like to propose Frank Hobbs for chairman.
I will second that.
Okay, and can I have a show of hands, please?
I agree.
Okay, great. I shall hand over to you then, Frank.
Thank you, Jay. Good evening, everybody. It looks like we're well served by the officers tonight. First of all, apologies for absence. Have you had any?
We have, thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Burgess and Terry.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. And this isn't a decision-making committee anyway, and so probably nobody needs to, just in case they think they do. Has anybody got interest they need to declare? Lots of shaking heads, so that must mean it's okay. We'll move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of January. Are you happy with those? And they can be signed. Do we sign them in due course?
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed.
All agreed. Thank you. Item 5 is Election Act changes. The agenda says Paul Butler is going to talk to you. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. How are we all? Right, bear with me a second while I just grab my slides. Won't keep you. See this? If I can get a thumbs up from someone.
Yes, I can see that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for hearing me out this evening. Just a quick update, really, with regards to the Elections Act 22. So the Act itself concerns UK parliamentary elections, local elections and referendums, and police and crime commissioner elections. And it's a change in law and not something that we've done locally as a district council. And so just as a reminder that the Act come in with its first tranche of voter ID at polling stations, improving accessibility and changes to the police and crime commissioner voting system. And they all come in last year in 2023. And in particular, the changes to the police and crime commissioner voting system went from first and second choice to first past the post. So it's much like a parliamentary where you vote for one person now, much simpler. But the reason why I'm coming to you today to have a chat is largely around tranche 2, so the upcoming stuff. So it concerns absent voting, overseas electors, postal vote handling and secrecy, undue influence, intimidation offences, commonly used names and addresses, and lastly, EU citizenship voting and candidate rights. So quite a lot to cover. So firstly, with regards to absent voting, this all started on the 31st of October last year. And what was implemented was a series of different measures for people that couldn't go to the polling station. So the first one with regards to postal vote voting, you used to be able to have that in place for 5 years and refresh your signature. It's gone down to 3 years as a maximum, and it's a reapplication. So you no longer refresh your signature, you have to reapply for it every 3 years. That's for domestic electors. And then domestic proxy electors, so those in the country, can have, so you can be a proxy for a maximum of 4 people. So 2 domestic and 2 overseas, and that's your maximum now going forward as of the 31st of October 23. They also introduced applications to include verification. So whereby you would add your date of birth and national insurance number. And if you couldn't be verified by that means going through Department of Work and Pensions, we would have to verify you with either documentary evidence or by local data matching. And also on the 31st of October 2023, there was an addition to the ERO portal, which already catered for voter authority certificates, whereby if people didn't have their own voter ID at the polling station, they've upped the capacity now, and it can include online applications for postal and proxy voting. So moving on to overseas electors. With overseas, there was a 15-year limit. So whereby if anyone was registered within 15 years of leaving the country, they could vote at UK parliamentary elections and UK-wide referendums. However, that 15-year limit has been removed, and anyone that is a British citizen living overseas can now register as an overseas elector. The criteria has changed as well. So because of the 15-year limit being removed, a person can apply with a previous registration on the electoral register or as a resident. So if they can prove that they were either resident in the country or registered previously, they can be registered as an overseas elector. But again, there are identity checks and address checks in place. And initially, they are sent to the Department of Work and Pensions. And then if they can't be verified, that means then we ask for documentary evidence or proof of residency. The overseas elector declaration, instead of lasting 1 year, it now will last 3 years. And there will be a bulk renewal on the 1st of November every year, starting from 2026. Any absent votes that they have in place, so that includes postal and proxy, will expire at the same time as their renewal. Okay, moving on. So postal voters that missed the post, and other things concerning postal vote handling and secrecy of postal votes are contained within this slide here. So the first bullet point, political parties and campaigners are banned from handling postal votes. And there's a bit of a caveat with that. Campaigners can handle their own postal vote and obviously post that back to us or hand it in at the polling station or civic centre, or that of a close family member that they provide regular care for. There will also be a limit on the number of postal votes that can be handed in at a polling station or council office, and the limit is 5 plus their own per election taking place at that time. Anyone that does miss the post that has to hand in their postal voting pack at a polling station or council office will be required to complete a return of postal vote form. And what that essentially is, it's a declaration to say they're not a campaigner, and that they're handing in the correct amount of postal vote packs per election. And they've added a reason why they've missed the post or couldn't post it via a Royal Mail post box or post office. And that form needs to be completed in full and accepted by the designated authorised person to have those postal votes accepted. If the form isn't completed correctly or in full, or the form isn't completed at all, those postal votes will be rejected. And that's something in law now. So the postal vote form is a legal requirement to be completed if they are handed in at a polling station or council office. If that form isn't completed and you know a person just drops it off like they've always have done previously, it's classed as left behind and will be rejected if that happens. So the last bullet point on here, secrecy requirements will be extended to postal and proxy votes. So what that means is it will be a criminal offence for a person to obtain or try to obtain information or communicate information about how a voter has voted by marking their postal vote. And that will be in place for elections on or after the 2nd of May this year. So undue influence or intimidation. So there's going to be a clarification of what undue influence is, and the changes essentially don't impact on the administration of elections, but candidates, campaigners, etc., agents should be aware of them. And the changes are designed to make it simple or simpler for the police to take action when allegations of undue influence are made. But it also concerns all campaign activity, included printed materials, and extends to anyone who tries to intimidate a voter either inside or outside the polling station. Sanctions include a disqualification order. So if anyone is found guilty of a criminal offence with regards to undue influence, they could be disqualified from standing or being elected for 5 years. So quite serious stuff. And separately from that, there's the Ballot Paper Secrecy Act 2023, which essentially it allows for independence at the polling station or via postal voting to allow a person to make their own decision and to stop what is known as family voting. And again, that's going to be for elections taking place on or after the 2nd of May this year. Okay, moving on. So commonly used names and candidate addresses. So it's what it says on the tin here on this slide, really. So the relevant election rules amended. So to allow candidates to use a commonly used name, even when the commonly used names are in a different order from the names stated, or include only some of the names or include additional names. So it's very clear on that bullet point. So essentially what it means, if you've got a double-barreled name, you could use the first part of that. If you've got a middle name where people you are known by that middle name, you can use that. Or if you fill in the nomination paper, for example, my name's Paul James Butler. If I've completed that as Paul James Butler, I could use either Paul or James within the commonly used names section of the nomination paper. But it's also the second bullet point to allow UK parliamentary election candidates who suppress their home address to provide the relevant area where the addresses are located as an alternative in the constituency. And that applies for elections on or after the 2nd of May 2024. Obviously, we still don't know when the next parliamentary will happen, but if it does happen before the 2nd of May, which I do believe it could do now, I think it's 2nd of May or beyond, that will apply. So getting to the end of my presentation, I hope no one's fallen asleep. So the next slide concerns EU citizens voting and candidacy rights. So this is quite a big change for the electoral registration officer. So EU citizens will no longer automatically be entitled to register to vote or stand for election. And EU citizens will be grouped from the 7th of May this year. And there'll be different qualifications. So the first qualification is that they are from a country that has reciprocal agreements with us, that have leave or do not require leave to remain in the UK. And currently we have reciprocal arrangements with Luxembourg, Denmark, Poland, Portugal and Spain. And at the moment that's been frozen. There's going to be no more additions for the polls that are happening from May, but that list can grow. So it'll be an ever-moving feast really on who can go back on the register. But as it stands for the 7th of May, it's those 5. And then secondly, EU citizens with retained rights who are resident in the UK before the 31st of December 2020. I'm going slightly more in depth with that. What the electoral registration officer is required to do is to review. So what will happen, the electoral register will be reviewed pertaining to the EU citizens that are on there and registered. and the application to local elections, PC elections, and referendums in England. So those particular electoral registers. And the review process can take place after the May polls. And what that means is the electoral registration officer, the ERO, will need to contact particular EU voters to ascertain whether they are still eligible to remain on the register. And the reviews must be completed by January 2025. There has been some prerequisite work done on the electoral register, and of the 2,200 EU electors that we have, approximately 1,600 will just roll over. So their eligibility criteria can be confirmed through data matching, but 600 will need to be contacted to ascertain whether they can remain on the register or not. And like I said, that will take place from the 7th of May this year. So last couple of slides, what this means for us as officers, obviously we'll need to raise awareness, and we have been through different literature, and more to follow on that. Obviously implementing the new procedures with regards to system requirements, changes, etc. Changes to staff training, especially for the upcoming election with regards to handling of postal votes. New forms, notices at polling stations, new information on postal vote packs and poll cards, logistics, so planning and risk mitigation on decreasing the amount of, for example, postal packs that could potentially be left behind, and a one council approach. So not only the elections team relying on the expertise of comms and other area officers, etc., to get the messages out there for us. And what that means for you as candidates, campaigners, agents, etc., raise awareness also, follow the new laws, promote online applications, so in particular for overseas, for voter authority certificates for those that don't have ID that vote at the polling stations, and for postal and proxy voting. And remember that verification is basically taking place for all ways of voting now. And then if you are an election agent or a candidate, or know of candidates that are an EU citizen, then their candidacy rights could change in the future. And so that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour there, a lot of information, but I do recommend going onto the Electoral Commission's site because they have a wealth of information on there. We also do have some information on our website, but it also signposts the Electoral Commission. But if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them or take them away and get you the answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Paul Thomas.
Hi, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Hi, Paul. Thank you very much. It was an excellent overview. I've just got a couple of questions for clarification. In terms of postal votes and who accepts them, is that a poll clerk who accepts them? Would that have to be the person who oversees the actual polling station would have to accept those forms?
Yeah, so it will be the presiding officer that accepts them.
It will be.
Yeah, the terminology is an authorised person.
Right, okay.
Because equally there will need to be an authorised person at the civic centre. So it's whether the returning officer wants to allow all customer contact to be authorised people, and it allows resilience and contingencies. But at the polling station in particular, it's the presiding officer that has overarching responsibility on that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, my second question, if you don't mind, in terms of undue influence and campaign activity, it's not unusual for people to be picked up from their homes and taken to polling stations to vote. Is that going to be allowed in the future, or would that be classed as undue influence? I know certainly in general elections, it does happen. So would that be classed as undue influence, or is that accepted as part of the norm of trying to get as many people voting as possible?
Yeah, I would think that's probably the norm. I would think it would become a bit grey or ambiguous if the person was escorted to the polling booth, and the person was in close proximity when they were voting. But I wouldn't think transport to the polling station would be a cause for concern there. But I can just double check that with the Electoral Commission if you would like me to.
again, I'm just thinking of those people who would be infirm and would need to be able to be transported there is one part of it. But equally, some people who may need assistance in terms of people who are visually impaired, for example. I know there's provisions made for them, so that wouldn't be deemed to be undue influence if they were assisted through that whole process then.
No, and particularly if there's any so avoidance of doubt, the polling station staff could take over, because obviously they can help and can assist, and they can fill in the necessary paperwork to say they've done that.
Okay, thank you. And my final point, if you don't mind, I don't want to hog this, but I appear to be at the moment. Just in terms of ballot paper secrecy and the role of election agents when it comes to overseeing postal votes particularly, it's not unheard of for election agents to be communicating with candidates about what the size of the pile looks like, for example. So would that be something which would be frowned upon in future in terms of ballot paper secrecy, Paul?
In terms of handling postal,
in terms of being election agents are allowed to be present while postal votes are being opened.
Right. Sorry.
Okay. So in terms of secrecy, it's not uncommon these days for election agents to be communicating with candidates in terms of what they've seen when they've seen postal votes opened. So I just wonder, would under ballot paper secrecy, would that be excluded in the future in terms of communication between election agents and prospective candidates?
Yeah, so secrecy at the postal vote opening sessions has already been in place. So what is found out at the poll, at the postal vote opening sessions shouldn't have been relayed anyway. That's part of the postal vote opening secrecy that's already been in place. So the Ballot Secrecy Act of this past year will solidify that even more. But there are different elements. So there is secrecy at the postal vote opening sessions. There's secrecy at the count, etc., etc.
I've participated in the counts and as a poll clerk as well, so I sort of understand that. It was just on the postal vote side when votes are opened, it's just clarifying that, and you've done that for me. Thank you very much, Paul. It's very kind of you. Thank you.
You're still muted, Anne.
Yeah, sorry, I dropped out. One of the joys of living in a rural area. So I wondered if you'd be kind enough to send your presentation.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Yeah,
as soon as possible. And one other question is, given that this is all new to people, and given that we can ask questions of you, is there going to be a central point in any next election that people can phone up with as and when queries that come up that an expert can be there to help answer?
Yeah, so in the lead up to the election, all of the election team, of which there are 5 of, will be in the offices between the hours of 10 till 4. But beyond that, from 8:30 till 5, answering emails and any communication that comes from customer contact with via web chat. But just to reassure, the postal vote changes are on, so they're part of the poll cards. So there's a bit on the poll card about if you miss the post and you bring them to a polling station or council office, you will be required to fill in the form. So you can't just drop them off. And it's also on the back of the envelope of the postal voting pack to say, pop it in the post immediately. But if you miss the post, there's exactly the same thing. It's also on the instructions as well within the postal voting pack. So there are various means already of trying to get the message out there. But the kind of fail safe is if they need to phone in, then it's fully manned up until the election itself, and we're in from 6 o'clock on polling day, and the lines will be diverted to us as well on that day.
Brilliant. So that's absolutely brilliant. Thanks for that. And then in the lead up to an election, I know there's obviously been lots of adverts and work done around voter authorisation certificates. if people haven't got any ID.
Yeah.
But is there any specifically, is there resources being put to, say, organisations that support people with moderate learning disabilities? Is there people who are elderly, perhaps, who haven't got a passport, shouldn't have a passport, and haven't got a driving licence? So I'm just wondering, what's your view? What's your kind of flavour of people being reached and reached well to ensure that they can vote? What would, it's probably a big question, but
Yeah, and it's a bit of a difficult one to answer, to be honest. The Electoral Commission have their national campaigns, but they're not targeted per se. They're very blanket, so on the back of a bus,
yeah,
the newspaper, etc. And our community safety unit has a database of 900 odd emails to community groups and things like that, and we have used
right.
it in the past for polling station reviews, and we could use them again just to get the message out. But just so you know as well, in addition to the polling station staff helping at a polling station if need be, there is the voter authority certificate for those that don't have ID, and you can apply for that either online or by way of a paper application that we have. So we can send that out. There's also something that we thought of last year with regards to accessibility, a polling station companion. So if we're made aware of someone that maybe has a cognitive impairment or is unsure of what they need to do at a polling station, they can just literally pick up the phone to us or email in, or someone can do it on their behalf. And the details that we hold on the register, we can generate a pro forma that they literally have to just give to the polling station staff along with their ID, and it explains that they're not quite sure of what they need to do. This is their details. Can you please show me of how and what I need to do to cast my vote? And again, going further than that, for those that are partially sighted, already in place at the polling station was the tactile voting device.
Yeah.
To enhance that, from last year, we have included and introduced what we've kind of called an audio ballot paper. So the polling station staff will have a QR code or a web address as part of their literature within the polling station. And if a person has an audio reader on their phone, or they have some sort of software that can read web pages, they can bring up that web page on their phone, and it verbatim reads out what is on the ballot paper, and it can be used in collaboration with the tactile voting device to say, under row 1 is candidate blah, lift that tab and you can make your mark, sort of thing. So it just allows them to be a bit more independent in the polling station if they want that. But the kind of contingency, the underpinning is that if they need any help, that the polling station staff have been trained to do that. But back to your original question with regards to getting the word out there, we will obviously do as much as we can within the resources that we've got, like we have done previously. And, I have to say, with regards to the voter ID last year in 2023, it was something new. And the reception feedback from the polling station staff was that a lot of people knew that they had to bring it. The majority either brought it or knew that they had to bring it. So the work that we did was worthwhile and, far-reaching, I think. And
so thanks.
Go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say thanks very much. That's a very full answer.
Lovely, thank you.
Can I come in with one other question, or two really? First one on postal votes. Is it possible to check whether your postal vote has actually arrived? Because since COVID, the post seems to be a bit haphazard in places, and people don't necessarily know whether something they've sent has got there.
Do you mean back to us? So you've received it, completed it?
I've done a postal vote, put it in the post, it's gone to you.
Yeah.
Is there any way I can check that my vote has actually reached you?
Yeah, so when it's been scanned in, the system will say that it's been receipted. So if you are unsure or you have any doubts with it being returned, you can phone us up or contact us and just say, have you received it? And we can look on the system. Obviously, if we've not got around to doing the postal vote session or not got around to your postal vote on that day, then the system won't say it's not been receipted yet. But we can always check it the next day or whatever, and then contact you back to say it has been receipted. No issue at all.
Right, thank you. The other thing is the change in the parliamentary boundary. Is that going to cause problems, or is it fairly straightforward for the fact that a lot of us are now going to be voting for Ashford rather than Folkestone?
Yeah, I think it's going to cause more issues if the election is combined on in May. Just for confusion on electorate side of things, but logistics for the returning officer as well, because of the separation of ballot boxes and ballot papers going to Ashford from the kind of Elam Valley division. If it's standalone, it will be a concentration on elector understanding. We did do the leaflet.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it's been well received. We had a couple of comments about that, and that's kind of like a precursor, to say that your ballot paper will essentially look a bit different to others that are down the road from you. But we've been asked and instructed by the acting returning officer for Ashford to do everything the same. So essentially, all that will be different to the electorate is that they will receive a different ballot paper. We will do all the staffing, we will do all of the polling stations, the postal vote issuing, the returns, etc., on behalf of Ashford. So all of them will be different in terms of the elector, is that they will receive a different ballot paper to someone down the road to them in Folkestone.
Thank you.
I've just seen
Brilliant. Did you want to say something? Because you flashed up every now and then. No, obviously not. Anybody else? No more hands showing. In which case, thank you very much, Paul.
No problem. I'll give Jake the slides. But if anyone thinks of any questions when I've gone, just ping me an email. No issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, moving on, we have now item 6, which is the community infrastructure levy. I don't know who was going to take this.
That's myself, James Hammond here. I work in the policy team. I'll just share my screen and we'll get going. Can people see my screen at the moment?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, evening everyone. Thank you for the invitation to tonight's event. I'm James Hammond. I work in the planning policy team at Folkestone and Hythe. In terms of a bit of housekeeping quickly, I'll share the slides with Jake and everyone can get access to them and come back to myself with any questions as and when they might arise in the future. But the structure today is just to give a bit of background on the community infrastructure levy. So it came into effect in August 2016. And the intention here is to provide a bit more detail to town and parish councils in terms of the transfers of money that the district council has made under the neighbourhood allocation to date. And just being upfront about the kind of questions that you might wish to consider tonight, if you want to raise any points, could be about the reporting mechanisms on showing how town and parish councils are spending still, going about how to decide what to spend so on in the future. So the consideration of things like preparation of your own infrastructure plan with a more local focus, and how you might look to engage with the community on how to spend still. So quick chronology from the top. So it came into effect. In fact, one second, I can't quite see my presenting screen. I have to hide that. No, that's good. So it came into effect in legislation in April 2010. The district council undertook its work to prepare all the evidence to take its first charges scheduled for examination, and that passed through examination with a clean bill of health and came into effect following adoption in August 2016. We then went about as officers preparing a governance framework that was adopted by Cabinet on the 24th of June 2020, just to give that internal means of choosing how the district council would spend the SIL monies that it will control. This has nothing to do with the neighbourhood allocation, which town and parish councils will concern themselves with, but I'll come on to the detail of that later. Then the new regulations came into force in September 2019, and there was a requirement for the council to publish an annual statement by the end of the calendar year, so 31st December each year. And that's just for transparency, a look across the previous monitoring period on matters such as the amount of SIL income, where there's been spend, how much we've passed over, and also a look at Section 106 agreements as well. So where there's been income from 106, where monies have been passed on in project delivery under 106. So we published our first IFS in December 2020, and that related to the 2019-2020 financial year. So it's always it's a monitoring tool in effect. So it takes a backward look at the previous financial year. And then we undertook work to revise the SIL charging schedule and that passed through examination last year to ensure that the charging schedule reflected the strategic sites that were adopted in the core strategy review. So taking one example, Otterpool Park, there was an allocation in the core strategy review. We then had to update the SIL charging schedule to take Otterpool out of SIL because Otterpool will deliver the infrastructure requirements through 106, and it would be too burdensome to charge both Section 106 and SIL. So effectively, that exercise took Otterpool out of SIL, as well as tidying up other bits and pieces as well. So the community infrastructure levy itself is a charge which could be levied by local authorities on new development. Effectively, it's an important tool to help deliver the infrastructure that's needed to support growth across an area. So it only applies where there's actually a SIL charging schedule that's been adopted that sets out the rates, and we publish that on our website. In terms of qualifying development, it's any new development, typically residential, but could also be commercial use, which creates net additional floor space of 100 square meters or more in the case of residential. Typically, that's a new dwelling or dwellings on a site, but there can be instances where an extension could exceed that 100 square meter threshold, but unlikely. But there is provision there to collect SIL if it were to occur. There can be relief or exemption from the levy. For example, the social component of larger sites where there is a need for affordable housing, the liable party can apply for an exemption relating to the social component of a scheme. But then also on a smaller scale, residential annexes and extensions and houses and flats which are built by self-builders. So there's self-build exemption as well. There are strict criteria that must be met, and the procedures that we follow is the qualifying authority to double check that a claim for exemption is actually one that we should be granting. In terms of look at the district on the spatial level, the diagram in front of you shows the district split up into relevant zones. So for residential, it's zone A, B, C, and D. And you can read through the legend there that zone A is effectively 0 rated. So parts of East Folkestone and also the area on the marsh around Lydd. And then you've got zones B, C, and D, where the tariff rate increases on that sliding scale that you can see. All of this is done on viability basis. So when we prepare our evidence base, it goes through a whole host of things. So the size of a site, that almost on a case study basis. So it takes each location, considers what would a greenfield site yield in terms of residual land value, what would a brownfield site yield, and the viability case is important because if the SIL rate is too high, then it's likely to kill off the prospect of sites coming forward. So the zoning that applies is to make sure that we collect an amount of SIL from developments that would not hinder them coming forward on grounds of viability, because viability would effectively SIL is required at source effectively. So a qualified development will pay SIL, and if there was a viability case that came forward, it's actually Section 106 items such as affordable housing and education that would be hit in order to make a scheme viable. Still can't be excluded from a development. It's effectively a tax that we receive as a tariff in effect. In terms of the apportionment, this is just standard procedure under the legislation. So the district council takes 5% for administrative functions. So, for example, officers that carry out everyday work on SIL. We've got a dedicated officer in the development management team that performs that function, but also covering costs associated with the examination procedure, of which we passed through one such example last year. The neighbourhood SIL is either 15 or 25% of SIL receipts that is passed over to town and parish councils in areas where development is taking place. This is the meaningful proportion or the neighbourhood allocation. So the reason why it's 15 or 25% is where there's a neighbourhood plan in place, the amount that we pass over increases to 25%, but there's only been one adopted neighbourhood plan across the district, and that's St Mary in the Marsh. So typically it's 15% at the moment. It could be 25% where there are made neighbourhood plans in place. And then the balance leaves the strategic SIL. So that is what the district council effectively handles control of. And under the governance framework that we adopted in 2020, we pass over 35% of SIL receipts to Kent County Council because we recognise the importance of the services that they deliver. Now, in terms of the amounts that we've passed over to KCC and town and parish councils, we've passed over quite a considerable sum to KCC and also a similar size sum to town and parish councils. So as of the 31st of March 2023, a total of 531,000, just in excess of, had been paid over to town and parish councils. The aggregated spend, taking a look across the piece, is just shy of 86,000 based on a March 2023 check on progress to date, which means that 445,000 remains unspent. And effectively, it's important that we kind of maintain that dialogue with town and parish councils to make them aware that there have been these monies passed over and the importance of annual reporting, but also proactively working with the town and parish councils, their own neighbourhood representatives, and also the district council to enable the spend of those monies that have been passed over. This is a breakdown of a running list of all the town and parish councils that have received money. Effectively, not every town and parish council has so far. It's only where a SIL receipt has been passed over to the district council that we then pass over monies to town and parish councils. So you can see some examples where there has been obviously large amounts of money transferred under the neighbourhood allocation, and also a degree of spend. But the retained funds column shows that a lot of town and parish councils have still got to undertake that activity of identifying projects that they could utilise to put their neighbourhood allocation towards. This is not exhaustive. This is just one example of profiling. So after I presented an overview and scrutiny a few weeks ago, Councillor Elaine Martin asked for a degree of coverage for the town and parish councils that are within her ward. So this is not exhaustive in terms of consistency of the previous slide, but it just gives a flavour of what monetary year where money's passed over. And from that, you can deduce that some town and parish councils have passed over some money some time ago. For example, Elmstead in 2020, 2021. And if we look at it on the next slide, there has to be the meaningful spend of that money within 5 years of receipt. So it's almost to flag it as an early warning sign to engage positively with those town and parish councils to ensure that the funds do not time out, because once we reach that 5-year cut-off, the district council can go about claiming any unspent monies. So I think it's important we've got the discipline of the reporting, and I think going forward, officers will certainly look to engage with town and parish councils, with a priority. A prioritisation of those where monies are about to time out or could soon time out. So in terms of town and parish councils, consideration of SIL spend, it could be that on a local scale you want to start preparing a list of those projects which the community sees as priorities for delivery locally. The SIL regulations state that a town and parish council must use the receipts it is passed to support development of a local council's area or part of the area by funding, and this is generic speak. The provision, improvement, replacement, operational maintenance of infrastructure, or anything else that is concerned with addressing the demands that development places on an area. There is actually more freedom for town and parish councils compared to the district council in terms of what SIL could be spent on. And I'll give one example on the next slide, but taking the example of affordable housing, we can't spend our strategic SIL allocation that the district council controls on affordable housing, but the neighbourhood proportion can be spent on affordable housing. So it's quite wide ranging. So if you think of infrastructure, it could be transport, it could be green space, it could be play space, it could be waste infrastructure, the whole spectrum really of that infrastructure spread. So the idea is that parish councils work closely with their community. They could also work with neighbouring parish councils and the district council to agree on infrastructure spending priorities. Town and parish councils could elect to commit their own neighbourhood allocation to the district council if they thought that a project the district council is looking to deliver could mean that we would have more funding available. But I think really there should be a more local focus initially on the spend of the neighboured amount. So as I mentioned previously, the proportion must be spent within 5 years of receipt. If they're not spent on appropriate infrastructure, then the district council can seek to claim back some or all of those funds. And there's just a reminder at the bottom to say that parish councils must administer the neighbourhood portion and publish annual reports each year on their website or on the district council's website stating how much they've received and spent. Under Llewellyn, who is present tonight, we engage with town and parish council clerks to understand the position for reporting. And I think because of the relative amount of attention being paid to SIL for any number of reasons, not only the amount that's being passed over, but also the positive impacts they've had on spend, that reporting is critical. And it's a two-way flow of information as well. So it's a case of town and parish councils reporting to us, but we also give them a forward look of when SIL receipts land with us, what they're then due when the next payment run happens, which is twice yearly, April and October. So as a bit of a reminder, in terms of the infrastructure needs, it's just addressing the extra demand of infrastructure and services that are caused by development. SIL can't be used as a replacement for everyday town or parish council expenditure, and misspent SIL can be claimed back. The idea of preparing a town or parish council infrastructure delivery plan could be a useful starting point for the prioritisation of projects, and town and parish councils could look at the district council's infrastructure delivery plan in this context to understand how they might frame their own ideas. And then also in IGP, we know that a number of town and parish councils are looking to reignite interest in neighbourhood plan making. So it could be a case that the infrastructure delivery plan set at that more neighbourhood scale is prepared in support of an emerging neighbourhood plan. So it's a bit of a quick run through the detail, but happy to open the floor to any questions. If I go back to the first slide, just to give a sense of the kind of thinking that I thought might come forward. If I can re-engage. I'm having problems with getting to the right section. Anyway, I can see that. Yeah, hands raised. So
Yeah,
Anne, please. Anne, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was very interesting, and I'm not sure why Lim's not been claiming that. But one of the things, the initiatives that we're looking at, or just starting to discuss, it's not an initiative yet, is working with the rural. It's RACE, the organisation RACE, that helps people look at affordable housing.
Okay.
And helping us to do a needs analysis. Then after we've done the needs analysis, we're going to get them to speak at our public AGM. So would this SIL money be something we could add into the mix when we're looking at developing possibly affordable housing in our parish?
Yeah, certainly. So as I mentioned, the SIL can be used, the neighbourhood allocation can be used on affordable housing. So it's just having an understanding of the scale of the SIL receipts. But I do some profiling, but that must be in terms of known. So where we've got either sites that have got planning consent that haven't yet yielded a SIL receipt, we can have a bit of a forward look on that detail. And then also allocated sites, so sites that have got an allocation in the local plan that haven't yet come forward. It would all be kind of subject to, but we can provide that level of information. So effectively, SIL is only paid once development commences. So
Yes.
Yeah, you need development to happen for it to be.
But it could be put in the mix. It could be put in the mix in answers. But anyway, we'd need to speak one-to-one. But
Yeah.
this is really, really interesting, fascinating stuff. Thank you.
Yeah. No, you're welcome.
Look forward to the presentation slides.
Yeah, I'll share them via Jake effectively. So hopefully he can share those more broadly with others that haven't managed to attend tonight. So yeah, I can see Councillor Prater.
Yeah.
Hi, and it's still Tim, but nice try, James. The SIL, is it on a specific development? Is it phased payment, or is it one-off payment triggered at a certain stage, like commencement of development, or at different points? As is my first question. My second is that I know that SIL is actually capped for a town or parish council at a certain level based on the number of households in the area. I understand that that cap does not apply if there's a development plan in place. Is that right?
Yeah, taking the first question, instalments, we've got an instalment policy. So any SIL liability in its totality under 50k is just one payment, and then between over 50k but less than 100k, I think it's it can be done as 2 instalments, and then over 100k it's 3 instalments. That's just me going from memory, but the instalment policy is on the website, and developers are obviously keenly aware of the instalment policy, and if they can split a larger liability over 2 or 3 payments, then of course they will. On the other point of the cap, where there's a neighbourhood plan in place, there's no such cap. The cap goes away. Where there is no neighbourhood plan in place, it's £100 per dwelling within an existing parished area. So we've actually got examples where I think Almstead, when I showed on my slide, the 14,100 payment, that was predicated on the fact that Almstead's actually quite a low number of household population. So we received quite a chunky SIL payment from a scheme that came forward, but because of the cap that had to be applied, we had to do some sums and check on the number of council tax paying households to derive the 14,100. So in that instance, they didn't get the full 15%. It wasn't far off, but we had to implement the cap. But that's the only example where we have done so. But yeah, and that's only applied per year. So there could be circumstances where the cap is almost reached, but every year you kind of reset the analysis on that.
Paul, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Hey, James, thank you very much for that. That was great, James, to understand all and to have some of those things reinforced. The question I have, you talked about where SIL has been spent by other parish and town councils. Would it be possible to have some examples of that so we get an idea of the kind of things that some of the other towns who have been active in spending their SIL, so we get an idea of the kind of thing that they've done and how they get that community engagement? It would be quite handy for us to be able to see that.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think that's an important case study to pass over to give town and parish councils a bit of confidence over the kind of examples of ways to approach it. Yeah, we can do that and provide it for you, no problem.
Yeah, again, and again, I think certainly I know the case with New Romney. I think all councils it goes into a ring fenced budget line anyway, as does the Section 106 money that we understand that we would be getting. But that is actually prioritised up front, isn't it, as opposed to CIL, where you can demonstrate you've got community engagement with what you're proposing to spend it on. So, for example, in New Romney, you have Parish Highway Improvement Plan, and we're looking at what we can do with infrastructure to support the delivery of that as well. So it'd be useful if you could see if some other towns and parishes have actually gone along the road of using CIL and how they've gone about it, rather than as, and I'm sure it applies in other locations as well, sort of wasting time and asking for things which would be otherwise, rejected.
Yeah. No, I think the Highway Improvement Plan is a great example of that kind of parent document that can then generate project ideas for delivery. It's just a case of how you distill that higher level detail into this is the specific project and this is the associated cost of delivering it. That's kind of the next step of challenge, isn't it? Councillor Mike.
Yeah, Mike. Can't hear you. You're still muted, Mike. Sorry.
I think he might have lost connection. Does anyone else have a question while we waiting for Mike's return?
Is the SIL payment sent to the parish council automatically, or they're notified automatically if it's done, or do we have to apply for it? It's the first part.
Yeah.
Second part, in the unlikelihood of us ever getting any, because where we are, there's very little allowed for any development. Would we be able to spend it on, say, passing it over to KCC to do some proper resurfacing of the roads?
Yeah, just so I can kind of guide you there. What parish area are you covering?
Mostly.
This should just be sort of fact checking off the top of my head. Effectively, unless it was, I can't recall any site allocations in our local development plan within Postling. So it'd be on the basis of what's called windfall development. So planning applications coming forward for new development that would be still liable, where we'd pass on a proportionate amount to Postling. So yeah, it's never say never, but kind of there are certain communities where the prospect of SIL is obviously lesser than the likes of Folkestone Town, Hythe Town, New Romney, and the same with Lydd, where there's been officer discussions that where you have a zero rated area, the area around Lydd, we're having discussions between officers to say, well, Lydd, even if development does happen in Lydd, then there wouldn't be any qualifying SIL payment because it's zero rated. So how can we work as a district authority to recognise that there could be a demand on SIL receipts in those areas? I'll come back to the other point on highways, Frank, in a bit. On the point of highways maintenance, obviously, yeah, potentially. I know that KCC are looking to actually deliver highway schemes or have delivered highway schemes. So down at Scanlon's Bridge, they implemented a new signalisation scheme down in Hythe, and that was actually quite a costly project. So they're using it to do interventions that rank as quite high priority on their overall list, but where they haven't got the funding. It's a question we could put to KCC about maintenance of roads, but there's always that challenge over what is their settlement from government and how can they best spend the money across their patch. So I'm sure they'd welcome the additional money, but they might always invite town and parish councils to try and spend it locally, because once it's spent, it's spent, isn't it? But yeah, a fair point. Llewellyn, I can see you got your hand up.
Oh, thank you, James. It was more just to reassure some councillors. James and I review SIL quite frequently, and we've been looking at best practice across the country. And a number of other parish councils invite bids from their local area, and then they prepare their infrastructure delivery plan in a forward look as to what they're then going to take forward and spend their 15% on. And just to reiterate James's point, any spend must be related to development or the mitigation of development. And I would suggest that it's spent on actual physical infrastructure as opposed to KCC maintenance of things. That's a capital thing. So I think putting it towards better crossing points, great idea. Putting it towards resurfacing that Kent probably should be doing anyway, probably questionable. Frank, your point about is it paid? It's paid automatically, sort of twice a year, or sort of quarterly, directly to you. Each parish council is then required to report back to the district council, and they should be publishing on their website. Hythe is a good place to look, Paul, in terms of examples of IFSs that have been done by others and what they spent them on. And Hythe have recently got very proactive in spending their allocations. Anita Jones, sorry, is the person to talk to, because she's recently got on top of that. And I know for Folkestone Town Council are currently looking at how they can deploy some of theirs on some highway crossing points as well. It would be useful, I think, for local residents and ourselves to point out where SIL money has been used locally. Development is not always welcome in areas, but I think it would be useful to explain to people that some things are being paid for by things that are being built locally. And the district council will definitely be doing that going forward as part of these things have been delivered and they have been funded through either Section 106 or SIL as part of a sort of a completing that story, because I don't think everybody always hears the end of the cycle. But I think there are some really good websites out there of other parishes and districts who are doing things slightly differently to us, which we can forward on to you for sort of good examples. But I think that forward look might help you all just to plan, take bids from people, get support, and take it forward. Thank you, James. And thank you, Frank.
Thank you,
Llewellyn.
Anybody else? See no hands. No waving hands. Nothing else. Did you have your hand up at one stage, Graham? Not here, I don't think. In that case, ladies and gentlemen, call the meeting to a close. But before we do, well, one thing I meant to the parish reps, you will notice that we asked for some things to come on the agenda of our last area committee meeting. Then they weren't possible this time because of the time scale between our meeting and this meeting wasn't enough for Jake to get people organised to talk on those things. So Jane, you had one thing that you wanted to brought forward, and that hopefully is going forward to the next meeting of this committee. That's the reason why they weren't there. So good night, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much. Excellent presentation.
Thank you for that, Frank.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentations. Very interesting.
And if anyone wants to send Mike a new microphone, I think he'd appreciate it.
Yes. Where are we? Where's it going to go? Oh,